If you thought you had mastered Mechanicus, Mechanicus 2 will humble you without asking for permission. This game does not forgive mistakes. Every decision carries significantly more weight, and that more relaxed style of the first game has become much more strategic and punitive. So in this video, I will show you 10 advanced tips I've learned that can make a difference in your gameplay. This isn't basic stuff. This is the kind of thing that completely changes how you play, optimizes your turns, and helps you survive the most difficult missions. If you want to stop getting beaten and start playing Mechanicus 2 the right way, stay with me until the end. I'm Matthew, and the video is about to start. One of the most important things to understand in Mechanicus 2 is that while the game may not have a traditional cover system, that doesn't mean positioning has ceased to matter. In fact, I would argue it matters even more, because here you don't press a button to snap into protection and call it a day. You need to actually read the environment. Pillars, broken walls, tall rubble, all of these become tactical tools when you start thinking about line of sight instead of just distance. The detail that changes everything is this. If the enemy cannot see you, they cannot simply erase you from the map from a distance. And when you position your unit in a way that completely breaks the line of sight, you force that long-range target to move. This seems simple, but in the heat of battle, it makes a huge difference because the opponent ends up spending movement points just to get an angle. In practice, it's as if you stole an offensive turn from them without needing to deal direct damage. I like this tip because it rewards a type of attention that many people ignore at the beginning. Some players enter with an XCOM mindset, looking for half cover or full cover as if the game were going to signal that to them all the time. But Mechanicus 2 seems to want something more physical, more spatial. You look at the map and need to ask yourself, from here, does this enemy actually see my unit, or does it only look like they do? When you start playing with this mindset, various difficult encounters become much more controllable, especially against Necrons focused on long-range attacks. For me, this falls into that category of advanced tips that separates a painful campaign from a much cleaner one. It's not just about hiding, it's about manipulating the tempo of the fight. You decide when the enemy fires, where they will need to advance from, and at what moment they will expose themselves to try to hit your team. And in a game like this, where every action counts and every positioning error can be costly, mastering the physics of line of sight stops being a detail and becomes almost an obligation. Cognition points are basically the fuel for everything you do. And when you start treating them as an absolute priority, combat begins to make much more sense. It's not just about attacking with your strongest tech priest. That, in fact, is usually the biggest mistake. What I started doing, and what has become almost a reflex, is always starting the turn with units that generate CP. Servitors are absurdly useful here, primarily by absorbing damage while contributing to the turn's economy. Rangers also fit in very well with safer shots, helping to build this CP base before any more aggressive action. It's as if you were loading the turn before actually playing it. And then comes the most satisfying part, when you hold your elite tech priests until the right moment. With a full CP bar, you simply turn the turn into a devastating combo. You can chain several heavy abilities in sequence, clear out dangerous enemies, and completely flip the rhythm of the battle. It's that kind of play that feels planned in advance, even when you are improvising. At higher difficulties, this stops being just a tip and becomes virtually mandatory. If you don't synchronize this order, generate CP first, spend later, the game punishes you quickly. But when you get this flow right, Mechanicus 2 stops feeling unfair and starts feeling truly strategic. That is when combat shines. Long-range Necrons are dangerous precisely because they can punish you from a distance without exposing themselves much. However, the game gives them a very clear weakness. When you get into melee range, a lot of things simply stop working or become absurdly inefficient. And that is where the so-called melee lock comes in. Instead of spending precious resources trying to immediately eliminate a strong ranged enemy, you can simply engage them with a cheaper unit or an explorator focused on melee combat. In practice, you turn that huge threat into a temporarily controlled problem. They are still there, but they stop being an urgent priority because they cannot use their full potential. The most interesting part is that this creates space for smarter decisions during the turn. While the enemy is locked, you can reposition the rest of the team, focus on more fragile targets, or even prepare a better combo to eliminate that Necron later. It is a more efficient way to play because you aren't reacting to danger, you are dictating what can or cannot happen on the battlefield. This is a classic tactic that works extremely well against this type of enemy. And the best part, it doesn't require a perfect build or rare units. Often, a simple character can already fulfill this role. When you start using melee, not just as damage, but as a control tool, the game practically opens a new strategic layer that many people ignore at the beginning. There comes a moment when you realize that not every fallen enemy needs to be resolved. Against Necrons, this mentality of clearing everything on the map can end up sabotaging your own strategy. The game lures you into wanting to eliminate any chance of resurrection, but in practice, that is only worth it when time is truly against you. The key point here is the resurrection meter. If it is not going to complete before the combat ends, that body on the ground is no longer a real threat. And when you understand this, your priority changes completely. Instead of wasting precious actions confirming kills, you start focusing exclusively on enemies that can still act. This opens room for a much more aggressive and efficient approach. You direct your resources to control the active field while ignoring completely what is already out of combat. And that's where the strongest detail of the strategy comes in: critical attacks. They not only pierce armor, but also remove the body from the equation immediately, preventing any possibility of return. Playing well against Necrons isn't about destroying everything, it's about choosing what is actually important to destroy. When you start to respect the battle's tempo and use crits intelligently, combat becomes cleaner, faster, and much more under control. Whenever you find a terminal or console on the map, the order of actions makes all the difference. Scanning before destroying isn't just about optimizing resources, it's about playing much more consciously with the Mechanicus 2 progression system. When you use the scan first, you guarantee the maximum Blackstone and also activate possible bonuses linked to that terminal. It's a direct, immediate gain that accumulates throughout the missions. Now, if you destroy it straight away, you do reduce the awakening level, but you lose value that doesn't return. And that's where the balance comes in. The game is constantly forcing you to decide between accelerating mission control or extracting maximum resources before doing so. The most important point, in my experience, is that it is not an either-or choice. You can do both, you just need to respect the right order. Scan first, take everything you can, and only then destroy it to reduce the awakening. When you internalize this, you start playing much more efficiently, especially in runs where controlling the awakening is critical. It's that kind of micro decision that, repeated several times, completely changes the final result. And if you are attempting something more advanced, like zero-wake runs, this stops being a tip and becomes an obligation. Every point of awakening counts, but so does every resource. So you can't play on autopilot and just go around breaking everything. To me, this is one of the best examples of how Mechanicus 2 rewards those who pay attention to the systems, not just the combat itself. In Mechanicus 2, it is very tempting to take all your Blackstone and invest heavily in a single tech priest or leader, creating practically an invincible unit. The problem is that the game was not designed for you to play in a single point. When you concentrate everything on just one character, you end up creating a clear bottleneck. You are only strong where they are. Meanwhile, other territories remain vulnerable, and the game starts pressuring you with simultaneous invasions. That was when I realized it was useless to have an absurdly powerful leader if the rest of my defense simply didn't exist. The solution that changed my campaign was starting to distribute upgrades more uniformly. Instead of creating a team carrier, I started building a consistent garrison where several leaders can hold their own fronts. This gives much more strategic freedom because you are not held hostage to always moving the same piece to put out fires. In the end, playing this management layer well is about coverage, not isolated raw power. When your leaders are balanced, you can respond to multiple threats at the same time and avoid that domino effect of losing territory due to a lack of presence. It's a simple change in mindset, but it makes your campaign much more stable. The natural tendency is to fill your loadout with healing Canticles to ensure safety, but Mechanicus 2 rewards those who think about rhythm and battle control much more. Healing solves the problem after it has already happened. CP economy prevents the problem from happening. When you start using Canticles that instantly recharge CP, the game practically changes speed. You start performing more actions per turn, landing better combos, and eliminating threats before they have a chance to react. In practice, This drastically reduces the damage you would have received. It's that simple logic. A dead enemy deals no damage, and a pressured enemy also doesn't play in their ideal way. The interesting thing is that this completely transforms how you build your team. Instead of thinking, how do I survive longer, you start thinking, how do I end this fight as quickly as possible? 1 or 2 more efficient turns make more of a difference than several heals spread throughout the battle. And when you master this, even more difficult encounters become surprisingly controllable. For me, the ideal balance ends up being 2 Canticles focused on CP economy or momentum, and 1 for healing only for real emergencies. Healing still has its value, but it stops being the center of the strategy. And that's when the game truly starts to flow better, because you are no longer reacting to damage, you are preventing it from existing. In the beginning, it is very easy to fall into the trap of relying almost exclusively on energy damage. The Adeptus Mechanicus weapons naturally pull in that direction, and at the start, that works very well. The problem is that the game slowly starts punishing you for this predictability, especially when enemies with specific resistance to that type of damage appear. It was in some more advanced missions that this started to become evident to me. I was dealing much less damage than I should have, even with strong builds, and the explanation was precisely in the enemy's defenses. Some more evolved Necrons simply ignore a good portion of energy damage, which turns your most reliable attacks into something very inefficient. The turning point happens when you start diversifying your arsenal. Bringing Skiteri units focused on physical damage, or equipping heavy weapons that deviate from the energy standard, completely changes the rhythm of battles. Suddenly, those more resistant enemies stop being a wall and become viable targets, because you have the right tools to deal with each type of defense. In the mid and late game, this stops being an option and becomes an essential part of the strategy. Having access to different types of damage means you aren't stuck in any specific situation. It's that simple adaptation that avoids frustration and keeps your team efficient, regardless of the type of enemy that appears. This one is, without exaggeration, one of the strongest mindsets you can adopt in Mechanicus 2. In the beginning, it seems like the game is pushing you to simply complete objectives and move on, but when you understand the awakening system, everything changes. Doing a clean mission without generating awakening is not just a bonus, it's a gigantic strategic advantage that affects the entire campaign. When you start aiming for 0 wake, every decision within the mission gains weight. You start to value quick kills, safer routes, and any tool that reduces the alert level. It's no longer just about winning the combat, it's about winning the right way. Sometimes this means playing more aggressively, other times more calculatedly, but always with the goal of not letting the meter rise. The impact of this on the macro is absurd. Keeping the planetary awakening low basically gives you time. Time to farm Blackstone, improve your characters, test builds, and enter important battles much more prepared. It's almost as if you were controlling the rhythm of the entire campaign instead of being pressured by it. And in a game where the difficulty scales with this system, that makes all the difference. This is that tip that separates an average run from a truly optimized one. When you start treating each mission as an opportunity to keep the awakening at 0, the game opens much more space for planning and consistent growth. It's not just about playing well in combat, it's about playing the system as a whole well. In the beginning, I only spent it when I had it, almost like mana. But the game, especially at higher difficulties, clearly expects you to think about how to generate cognition before even thinking about attacking. This completely changes the way you position your units. It's not just about reaching a good shooting angle or avoiding damage, it's about extracting value from every action. Servitors, for example, stop being just shields and become fundamental pieces in cognition generation by absorbing damage. Rangers also take on a more strategic role, contributing from afar while fueling your action economy. When you start planning the turn with this in mind, everything becomes chained together. You activate units that generate cognition first, accumulate points, and only then do you bring in your heavier tech priests to spend this resource efficiently. It's almost like setting up a sequence where each piece exists to empower the next, and at higher difficulties, this stops being optimization and becomes survival. If your cognition generation is low, your options simply disappear, and combat becomes limited and punitive. But when you master this flow, the game opens up. You start controlling the rhythm of the battle instead of just reacting to it.